Welcome to Talking Absolute Worship. There are now only 5 shopping days to Christmas and the propers are coming to a close, but not quite, because today we're going to have a look at Proper 25. And I have with me Lithan and Peter, who are eager to share the depth and quality of their thoughts on these passages. I'm going to ask Peter to go first because he's brimming with excitement over Luke chapter 18 and Jeremiah and Psalm 84. So Peter, where do you think you're going this week with your preaching?
Well, I had a sleepless night because, as you say, I'm so excited to be doing this morning. I found it difficult to get any sleep last night and decided in those hours of night that I would go with the Psalm and the Luke reading for this week. For me, having read all the passages, I think the Psalm gives us a brilliant background and a context for our understanding of the Luke reading, and possibly of an understanding of the main point Jesus is making in the story that he tells. So I thought I'd dip into the Psalm, set some background and a bit of context, and then we'll pick up the story in Luke's Gospel after that. So I think the verses from Psalm 84 seem to speak of a longing to commune with God and the well-being that comes from encounter with that living God. And I totally get that the imaging and the examples of God, understanding God's presence in time and space, have changed a bit from the days of the psalmist. Some of the image that's being used may not be what we would use today. But I think it still really speaks to us. What we're being shown in the verses is that visible actions become the means of grace and revelation of the presence of God. And I think we still, as modern day Christians, cannot deny that we all engage in actions, practices, rituals, liturgy to experience God's real presence and grace. Just look at the moment that the growth in Forest Church and the idea of being outdoors in nature in order to worship, to experience, to really feel God's presence with us is just one example. And the other one for me would be actually when we gather around the Lord's table. It's probably for a lot of Christians one of the most meaningful expressions of our faith, and there is a genuine thought that we encounter God around that table, that there is a reality of God's presence with us. Now for us, I know that's not through saying bread and wine suddenly magically become the blood and the body of Christ, but we actually believe the Holy Spirit enables us to experience God's real presence. And in church, we profess that our lives are not our own, but they're God's. And it's against that backdrop, really, that we meet our Pharisee and the tax collector in Jesus' parable in Luke's Gospel. And I think it's really important that we remember that Pharisees were very well respected people by the masses and seen as an example for people to try to attain what they had. They were holy. And they were looked up to by most people. It's only our interpretation of scripture, as we've gone on through the years, that has them as a despised group. I remember years ago suddenly being woken up really rudely with the idea that these were really well-respected people, because as a child in Sunday school, they were the ones we just didn't want to be like. They were the ones that were the baddies in the story. But actually, that's just not the reality of how this is being played out at that time. And as people heard that story that Jesus is telling, they'd expect the Pharisee to be the one who was right with God. And as we've reflected already, there's nothing wrong in having ritual and different ways of encountering God either. In fact, most of us need them. What is important here, I think, is being drawn out, is to see the whole picture of Jesus' words. If we think the parable's simply a warning against pride or a relationship with God based on works, I think we somehow miss the point. I think the key point is the Pharisee's posture before God and his contempt for the tax collector, not his practices. So it's actually a relational thing going on rather than practices. The nature of God's grace is that it can only be received by those who have learned empathy for others. So that grace takes in mercy and forgiveness. And as we're told in Luke 6:36-38, the merciful will receive mercy, and those who forgive will receive forgiveness. So the Pharisee had enough religion to be virtuous, but not enough to be humble. And it's this that drives him away from rather than towards the tax collector. So it's actually humbleness and relational. It isn't about the rituals and the things that he's doing, which, given if his heart was in a different place, there wouldn't be a problem with that, because it would be part of him acknowledging God. So I think if you take that story, I mean, there's really big questions for us as churches and individuals today as well. And the questions are we driven towards those who most need us, or away from them into our own religious practices and behind the church doors? And I think everything drives us out. But in an age where we feel threatened through lack of numbers and through thinking God's not really as active as God once was, we can be driven into being rather like the Pharisee. We might not use the language and we might not see it in the same way, but that is the big question. Are we driven towards those God would have us meet, or actually away from them through the things that we do day by day? So that's where I'm going to go with, and that would be the challenge I'd pop in at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I found myself also very drawn to Psalm 84. It's not often the psalm that draws me, but yeah, this one kind of did, because it's clearly one of those psalms in that group of psalms that's one of those ones that's talking about, and I always get mixed up with the timings of the psalms. So clearly they weren't like written down in a book when David was on the throne. Some of them sound exilic to me. The people are in exile and they're remembering back the journey that they used to take to the temple. And this even these few verses are full of that, aren't they? They're remembering going on that walk through a particular valley, and the rain covering it with pools, and there being springs, and as they got closer and closer to the temple, they went on from strength to strength. They probably got weary halfway around, and then they could see that they were getting close, and it says they go from strength to strength, the God of gods, obviously. And it's very much a journey, isn't it? And I think it's a remembering a journey when they can no longer make that journey. And looking back and think, if only we could do that again. How lovely is your dwelling place? And I don't really know what to make of it. Whether to think that's a comfort to them in exile, or whether that's a frustration to them in exile. Whether there's a sermon in here that says, yeah, have you not found God's dwelling place in exile? Have you not found God's dwelling place in Babylon? You're going to be there for more than a generation. You need to find God's dwelling place there, rather than saying, oh, we can't get to it anymore. So there's a little part of me that's wondering whether that's going on, but I'm not sure whether I dwell there. But it might lead me down that path of asking people where for them God's dwelling place is, and what do they do to travel there. Not necessarily a physical journey, but how do they travel into God's presence? Remember you talking about rituals and customs. Maybe rituals and customs are a way that people do that. What I do is, someone might say, I go down the garden and I sit on the bench, or I go out and walk around the lake, or I go into this particular corner of that room where I sit on that particular chair and I light a candle, or whatever it is. What is it you do to deliberately seek out God's presence? What's that journey look like for you? I don't know about the Valley of Bacar. You could put that up on the screen or something, couldn't you?
And I think a lot, if we're honest, a lot of the Old Testament's in that. I was really struck. I'd just been leading a weekend on preaching the Old Testament, and it made me really think about what I could say to people and different ways we encounter the Old Testament. And I realized an awful lot of the Old Testament is, it is about encounter. And it's like you can have the conversation you'd have down the pub rather than the conversation you'd have in church with the people and the characters of the Old Testament, that somehow you take away all the niceties and you actually get down to the nitty-gritty of what does it mean to follow God. And I rather like that. That's far healthier place for me to be in. And I think where you're saying, well, what is this really saying? There's so much in all of the Old Testament that actually operates in that way. Well, this doesn't sound very good, or this isn't where we should be as a people. And it sort of brings it alive in that way. And I think that psalm is a sort of grappling with, well, what does it mean to be in the presence of God?
Absolutely. I think that's probably why I was drawn to it. The other verse that sort of stuck in my head was, even the sparrow finds a home and the swallow a nest for herself where she may lay her young at your altars. And I was thinking, oh, that's a nice little picture of birdies in the forest. And then I thought, hang on, maybe this person is actually remembering being in the temple and watching a bird building a nest in the temple. Because they did have outer courtyards, didn't there? It's certainly possible that birds could fly in, I would imagine. And there's no roof on it. Obviously, we've seen it. So there used to be a roof on it. But was he watching a bird and then the little ones coming down by the altar? I don't know. But it sounds like a very specific image. Even the sparrow finds a home and the swallow a nest for herself. It makes me think of this very church, what I'm sitting in, looking up at the rafters. Even the butterflies, which we can never get rid of, and it's a mystery of what they eat, but they appear all year round out of the I think they're using the glue in the wallpaper on the ceiling, because these butterflies appear as they have done for decades. And every year, regardless of what the church does and renovations they do, the butterflies are still there and they just appear, and they sometimes fly around on Sunday morning. So it kind of made me think of that somehow. Even the butterflies eating the glue in the wall. What do they eat? They must be eating something up there, which probably isn't good, but who knows? So yeah, I won't say anything about Luke, because I presume that Lithan's going to focus on Luke. She's a Luke kind of a girl. Where were you going to go, Lithan?
Well, I'm a bit more rambly than that this week, Phil. I'll start with a little bit more about Luke, and then share with you my quandary as to exactly what to do. And I think one of the other things about the Luke reading is that when Peter's talked a lot about how we see the Pharisee, but we also need to remember how people would have seen the tax collector. So as soon as Jesus says there was a Pharisee and a tax collector, their understanding of, oh, we know what's going to come next, is the opposite to ours, because we now go, oh, tax collectors, they were seen as bad, but secretly they were good, because we know about Zacchaeus and we know about Matthew, so we kind of go, yeah, whoever that is, they're going to be the goodie in the story, and Pharisees automatically the baddie of the story. And so when Jesus comes out with this, I think sometimes we just don't get how, because we don't get crowd reaction at all, but I imagine they'd be going, what's it going on about? And it really would have made them think in a way that possibly we don't think so much about, because of the way that we now put it the other way around. So it's kind of, I might spend a bit more time on the balance. As Peter said, Pharisees were the good guys, the venerated. The tax collectors were awful. You wouldn't really even want to be in the room with a tax collector. I think that also the fact of praying out loud was how you prayed. So your own prayers, and that's still very much the Jewish tradition is you pray out loud, whereas we've gone ever so humble so no one can hear us. And we'd never pray in British culture. You don't pray at the same time as someone else. So Phil and I once went to Easter People, which is a Methodist thing, funnily enough, just after Easter. And there were hundreds of us in this hall, and someone said, right, we're going to pray like the South Koreans do, and we're all going to pray at the same time, because that's what they do, and it's amazing. So he said, right, we're going to start praying now, and nobody could be the first one, but they should have gone, right, stage, we will all start. But there were like 3 minutes of the most awkward silence ever. And it's just again just that reminder of our different cultures and traditions, that it's quite, what would it be like if we all prayed our prayers out loud, that we felt able to say what we say in our prayers, and is some of that because we're afraid that people will go, well, that's not a very good prayer, is it? And I think so. Probably the more general thing is that I do want to talk about prayer and go, saying, God be merciful to me, a sinner, is enough. You don't need to have great, wonderful, beautiful prayers. There is a space for that, but actually God's not interested in our sacrifices. What he wants is honest life and honest prayers. But I love the way actually that in the end, quite often we come away with saying, I thank you that I'm not like this Pharisee, and the way he prays, which is exactly what Jesus said. That's where we have to be really careful in all of this. And so often, because as humans, we do like to know, where do we fit in the social scale? Am I better than this person and not than that? And so often we will use that, I'm glad I'm not like them. It's really interesting that in the short time I was a hospital chaplain, hardly anybody I spoke to would admit they were the worst ill person in the hospital. They would all say, well, at least I'm not as badly off as so-and-so. I used to think, and you think you're the only one that said that. No, everybody says it. Everybody who's well enough to speak kind of has, because we don't want to feel like we're the worst at anything. But I guess that honesty of the tax collector feeling like he's the worst is actually, it's raw and heartfelt. And that's the one where Jesus says, that's how you should be, just be honest and heartfelt. And I wonder if talking about prayer would be the thing. You could, alone, having heard you two talk, I'm not sure now, about using the psalm as kind of about praise, because there is a lot about praise in that, and maybe looking back on your life and the journey that's gone on. You can use Timothy with that, because it's Paul at the end of his life, and for many of our congregations, they might really get this. I'm already being poured out as a libation, that sense that, I'm really at the end now. This is it's already starting. Yeah. And the time of my departure's come. But he's able to say, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. And that is so profound, isn't it? Mm. And I guess we won't be far off the funeral of the Queen, who which is, it will be a good hook to hang thoughts about death on, because it's something that we have all shared in, but yet is not a death that many of us have a personal connection to, really. So we can talk about, what does it mean to say that, to come to the end of your life. Being poorly goes, to start with, nobody would help me, but actually in the end they did, and I was rescued from the lion's mouth, and the Lord rescued me from everything. So that might be also a looking back and giving thanks for those touchstones in our life where we felt close to God, and being encouraged to fight the good fight and finish the race. And even if we feel, I'm not like Paul, or I'm not good enough, we are good. And I think that's kind of what the parable's saying. As soon as we say, I'm not good enough, Lord, help me. We're good enough, because that's what God's love's about. And then there's Jeremiah 14, which has lots of breast beating, like the tax collector does, about sinning, that our iniquities testify against us. Our apostasies are many, and we've sinned against you. And it feels like you've gone now, God, you've gone, you know. It feels like you're a mighty warrior who's not helping. And then they say, but no, you're in the midst of us. We're called by your name, and don't reject us. And I think just that sense of how important confession can be, so that we can think about prayer, maybe encourage people about personal prayer, perhaps even try the praying out loud altogether thing. Although I've never tried it since, because it was so off.
I think we should do it at Synod. Try it at Synod next time.
I think if you're going to do it, you need people primed to start you off, but just that sense of experimenting with prayer and helping people feel comfortable with prayer, and that all prayer is good enough. I think so you get, oh, I'm not going to pray out loud, or I don't know what to say. And I think, well, no, most of my prayers are pretty standard, basic, because I'm not someone who can do prose off the cuff. But it's okay. And as I said earlier, there are times for well-crafted, beautiful prayers, but the danger in them is that people will then go, oh, I can't do that, so I'm not even going to try. I'm too embarrassed to share my prayers out loud. And I just think this is a way to encourage people to think about prayer, and about being more open to prayer, but also knowing that we've got this safety net, that there's no one's ever going to give you marks out of 10 for your prayers. God's not going, well, that one was great, that one was terrible. God just goes, I'm so glad that you've prayed.
Cool, thank you, Ethan. I'm glad you brought out some thoughts about Timothy, because I think that's really helpful, about where Paul is at. Because if you're not careful, reading that alongside the Luke passage could make Paul sound a bit like the Pharisee standing up saying, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith, I've been a successful Christian, I've done it all. But I don't think it is that at all, is it? And as I read it, and I don't want to set Lithan off, but I don't mean in an angry way. Lithan and I are going through something that most people will go through at some point in their lives, in that Lithan's father-in-law has gone into a nursing home, and there are a lot of looking back at what my ministry's come to an end. I'm now no longer, and facing something that's to come is a difficult thing, isn't it? I did a funeral a few weeks ago for an elderly woman, I think who was 97, and her daughters were telling me about her final hours, and they said it was really peaceful, and people often do, and then she said, but it was almost like she made sure she told us that she had no regrets and no anxieties. And I thought, wow. Paul's not quite saying that, but he's kind of close to that, saying, yeah, the end is coming. I'm a bit scared about it. I'd quite like a bit more support, but I know that I'm safe. I know that I'm in God's hands. Is kind of what he's saying. I think I know. My life's been up and down, blah blah. I've tried my best. He doesn't quite say I've tried my best. He says I've done this and I've done this, but that's just the way Paul is, isn't it? So I always find Paul a bit difficult, but that's helpful, Lithan. So thank you for that. I also had a look at Jeremiah, and I sort of jotted down in the margin the flow of this Jeremiah text, which basically goes, we're terrible. is how it starts. We're terrible, but leaving that aside, it's a slightly way to get that out of the way. Yeah. We're terrible. Right, done. Leaving that aside, God, you appear to have forgotten about us. And then some startling things. Are you confused? They say to God.
Yeah, I love that.
Have you got confused because we're your people? And hang on, where have you gone? Just I can't imagine a prayer in the YrC that asked God if he'd just got a bit confused and had forgotten about us. There you go. Are you confused? And God interjects. Well, you wandered off, remember? Then they go, oh yeah. Well, don't give up on us because we need you. I just thought that is just such a human. This is such a human story, isn't it, about our relationship to God? Yeah, we know we're terrible. Let's forget that for a moment because we need you. Why have you wandered off? Well, let me remind. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fair cop. But we need you. So there you go. So I wondered whether I might take all of these readings together, which is a bold move. I know, bold move, and talk about how people come to worship as an overarching theme. We could come to worship like those in this Jeremiah passage as ones who feel lost, that God has gone silent, that we're groping, we don't know where God is anymore, and we're just a bit disconnected and looking. We might come in that kind of frame of mind, or we might come like the psalmist, for whom it seems just very familiar and welcome and the highlight of their week, kind of thing. Or like Timothy, like world-weary Christians. This is written for a Christian leader, isn't it? So I wonder whether the ministers might read this differently to congregations. I'm beating my head against a brick wall here. I've tried my best, but there's no end to it. I've had enough now. I've come to the end of this. But there may be people in the congregation who feel that, I've had enough. The world has got me down. There's no end to the grind of it all. And then, of course, Luke is, I suppose, the ultimate parable about coming into God's presence that you've both talked very eloquently about how that works. Yeah, listen.
Going back to Timothy, one thing, to be fair to Paul, when he says there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, and you go, oh Paul, just stop it. He then says, but it's not just for me, but for all who've longed for his appearing. So he does say, this, it's not just about me, this is about everyone.
He does.
It's possible that in the next year or so I might have to preside over the closing of a church, and I wonder whether this, I haven't used this passage before. I've only done 2 so far, thank the Lord, but I wonder whether that's it. This is something, a passage that there's a real honesty about it, and it says, not everything is great. We've got to the end, but we can say we fought the good fight, we finished the race and kept the faith. And I think it's really important for people or churches or things at the end stage of their season of life to be able to know that this is something, a task that's been completed, even if not totally completed, even if there were a few more things to do, that we can say you've done enough now, and actually we never needed to do anything to get that crown of righteousness. We get to wear the crown because we love Jesus, and even more so because God first loves us. That's what gives us the crown, not through anything that we've done in particular, but that we've been able to have that trust and hope in God.
I think that'd be very powerful. You could
That
also in that folder. So you could also in that folder tuck away Psalm 84 as what you preach on to open a church. Lovely is your dwelling place. So you can do that in the next year or so too, and then you've got the 2 in there. Sorry, Peter. Yes.
No, I was just thinking with what Lithan was saying there. I think and what you've said about possibility of using all the readings, that the thread that's going through, and in what Lithan is saying as well, is if you really believe what Lithan just said at the end there, then it gives us the opportunity to say, so we can be completely genuine in our relationship with God. And that hits Lithan's prayer stuff. It hits all what you were saying. It's where I was at. It's about the absolute fact that we can be completely genuine with all of our emotions, all of our feelings in our relationship with God. And in a sense, I think that would give people a real sense of being affirmed, when if we can help them to know, be yourself, just be yourself, because God's the beginning and the end and everything in between. And I think a lot of Christians struggle with that. They really struggle with being who they are in the presence of God, which is weird, really, when God says all you have to do is bring yourself as you are, and I accept you. But we really, as people of Western faith, really struggle with that. And I'm just only now thinking, as we've all talked, there may be my thread that goes through it all that I'd want to pull out. Let's be authentic in who we are, what we are, and how we live our faith.
I think
because that's what attracts.
I think that works. I think that works. And I think one of the barriers to why haven't we achieved that? Why don't we see it? And one of the barriers is in this Luke 18 passage, because the difficulty with this preaching Luke 18 is, if you end it by saying, therefore go out and be like the tax collector, it's almost like you said, therefore be more humble. People go, right, must be more humble, and then they go, yeah, I've got more humble, I'm really good at being humble, and then you just go around in this loop because you're bragging about being humble. Whereas I think I'm just wondering whether the point of this parable is not about being humble or about being arrogant. It's about you appearing in a worship setting and it being about comparing yourself to someone else, and it's the comparison thing that is a key in here. The tax collector is almost completely unaware, according to this parable, of the Pharisee. He's focused on his own relationship with God, whereas the Pharisee, all he's thinking about is the tax collector. Thank you, I'm not like him. We've all got our own list that we may not ever speak out loud, that we would be able to think in our heads as people wandered into church. It might just be a roll of the eyes. Or something that we do that betrays our list. So yeah, I think that might be what's going on in there for me. This whole and if we were to answer Lytton's question partially, what would happen if we did all pray out loud? Well, not at the same time, but when those prayer meetings when you sit in a circle, it's usually when it's ministers, and you sit in a circle and you say, right, we're going to have a time of open prayer, and one person starts and another person starts, and before long, it's a competition as to who can pray for the most obscure place that nobody has read about in the news yet, but you have, sort of thing. And you pray for a remote tribe in the Amazonian jungle, and people go, oh, I didn't know about that, but they must be really good because they've got their ear to the ground in prayer or something. And it becomes a competition, and whole prayer becomes comparing ourselves with other people, and it's difficult to escape, isn't it? That's the barrier to it, I think. Sorry, Lytton, you're being very patient. You were going to say something.
I am, yes. I was just thinking about with the tax collector saying, "Oh, have mercy to me, a sinner." It's no good if he comes every week and says that same prayer, and still does things that are not good, and still cheats people or lives a life that's bad. I guess. Can you be a good tax collector? Can you be someone who is as scrupulous as possible, but doing a job that is not liked? I think, yes, you can. So it might be that he knows he's a sinner because everyone else tells him because of what he's doing. But if actually there are things in his life that need changing, it's no good just coming to pray this every week and then going away and living exactly the way you did before. That was just one of the things that I thought about. And after all, to be fair to the Pharisee, he tithes and fasts. He does do. The thought of fasting just fills me with horror. Phil wouldn't want me to fast because I'm terrible if I haven't eaten. But there are things that that in the time and the traditions, he is living in a right way, but his heart isn't right. And we don't know about the tax collector, because it is only a story, but I just thought it's worth saying. It's no good coming every week and going, oh, forgive me, and then just living a life that's full of the stuff you've just been forgiven for and coming back for forgiveness the week after.
That's the impossible balancing conundrum scales of grace, isn't it? As we say, oh, but your behaviour's got to change. Oh, but it doesn't depend on your behaviour. So how much? I mean, how many times is he allowed to come back and say miserable sinner that I am before it's not okay? And how much does he have to go out and change his life next week? Once you start down that road, it's the preacher's graveyard, isn't it? Really, to try and set parameters on God's grace or how that works, but clearly with other parables there has to be some evidence of your journey with God in the way that you act. You can't say the Bible isn't clear about that, but also the Bible seems to be clear that in passages like this you just need to be honest with God about who you are, and God is full of grace. So right, we better move on before we drop into a hornet's nest of theology. So there may be other ways that we could bring these passages to life in the lives of our congregations. Peter, what do you propose?
I've got a couple. The first one, I confess, I've taken from Spill the Beans, because I'm a great admirer of Spill the Beans. So it is not original. It is their idea for this week, but I thought it was a great idea. And that was about having a variety of boxes and guessing what's inside the boxes. I like that idea. So you could have big flash ones and all kinds of different boxes, and asking people what would be in this. So one might be that has a flash dressing. One might be a Christmas box. One could be a Jack in the Box. One could be all kinds of different things. But then having something that you give to everyone in the congregation in the small or the plain brown box. So, and then gives you the chance to talk about not outer looks, but what's in our hearts that counts. Quite simple, but actually could be quite powerful imagery for people of all ages, I think. Especially, I thought we could talk about in that, with Christmas coming up, which you've alluded to, Phil, with Christmas coming up, how are we going to do up our presents? Will we feel under pressure to use glitter paper and everything else that actually is environmentally really bad? Or will we use something that is plainer? Or would you feel guilty for doing that? So there's loads of different areas you could play around with that boxy idea to bring out all kinds of things. And my other idea was, this isn't in Spill the Beans, so I'll take credit for this one if people want to. What will we notice in the week ahead as we go about our daily life? What is God calling us to see? Are we seeing with God's eyes? And what is God calling us to do in our community? And I would then want us to be calling that a week to look with God's eyes, and then to base next week's service, even though I may finish up offering you some thoughts about what we might do on that in a future edition of Absolute Worship, I would want to say chuck that out the window and go following week with how are we going to implement what we've seen, that God has seen through us in this last week, and use the whole service.
You'd need to have something up your sleeve just in case you got a dreadful silence from the congregation.
Yeah. But that would be my second idea, to get us thinking about how we look, how we pray, how we, all the stuff that we've been talking about today.
I always enjoy that about what you say, Peter. You often bring us stuff that extends beyond the 1 hour morning service, and I think that's a really useful thing always to keep in mind, how we extend the worship experience beyond the hour that we have on Sunday morning, if indeed it is an hour on Sunday morning that you're talking about. I imagine it is for most people. And I think
That's
really
the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? The Sunday morning bit. It's, you know, as being someone who believes in community and fresh expressions and that, it's not about Sunday morning. It's about how we live and how we connect and how we communicate.
Yeah, we go straight back out into the world, and then I have my day off, which is Monday. So cool. So, Lyndon, what have you found?
I think depending on the size of the congregation that I'm going to, if it's small to medium, I might make a prayer journal. If it's a larger church, I'm not making prayer journals for everyone. That's too much work. But it's a kind of the same idea as Peter, that say for the next 7 days through your prayers, kind of be observant. And again, it's having something to take home. I might have some prayer stations around for the kind of intercession-y part of it. So we could have cotton wool balls as a kind of thanks to God that for what we can do, but that it's something that you hold lightly, that I suppose who we are is God's, you know, kind of caring for it, but also that we need to hold lightly to that. Have a butterfly that would be hope, a prayer of hope, and that would be a small cutout butterfly. I can do that quite easily because I have a machine, and that would be something to take home as a reminder of the prayers. And then, you know, something for the world, probably candles on a map, because that's quite simple to do, but kind of having different prayer stations with different sorts of prayer around the room, possibly just having quite a lot of time doing that. Again, it depends on the congregation you're in. It's always more difficult because I'm an itinerant preacher now. I don't know what a different congregation might be like, and just suddenly doing this and going, right, walk around and do this, they might just sit there and go, no, we're not doing that, which actually happened to one of my congregations that I knew well. Kind of, I'd been there 3 or 4 years, and I did prayer stations, and 40 people, nobody moved.
Wow.
They just weren't ready to do it, and I never quite worked out what was it that they needed to be able to do that. Is it just that it wasn't the right setup in the church? I think they were kind of long raked pews, and maybe it's quite hard to get out. And again, I should have primed 1 or 2 people to say, can you start doing this, to see if that would encourage others. So now if I do prayer stations, I also give you an option for sitting down and where you are and doing something in case you don't want to. So that's just my little caution with this. You've got to know. And other churches where I've not known them so much, they've leapt up and done it. You know, it just all depends. And you might want to use different versions of Psalm 84. So if I can share screen, share sound, then try and find, I can't even find the right thing now. Oh, it's there, right. We
pride ourselves on our professional.
We do. It's just because it's on. Right. So I found this. It's worth it now. I found this really useful site called contemporarypsalms.blogspot, and what it has is, for every psalm, a list of reasonably contemporary songs. I say reasonably contemporary because I noticed that this is from 2013, and this is, so it's already 11 years old, so there might be some more newer songs to be used, but you could, with your prayer spaces thing, or just as part of a time of worship at the beginning, use different songs that fit with the psalm to kind of underscore your prayers. So one is, this is a really old one, but I love. Although I've always sung it much slower than this. I think it sounds far too jolly like this.
How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord of hosts, to me. My soul is longing and fainting, the courts of the Lord to see.
And there's a really lovely harmony that they're not doing to that one, but there you go, that was the version I found. And then sorry, the stop share thing at the top comes down when you want to. There we go. So this is One Day in Your Court.
Your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. My soul longs and even faints for you. For here my heart is satisfied within your presence. I sing beneath the shadow of your wings. Better is one day in your courts, better is one day in your house, better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere.
It goes on for 4 minutes 52, so we won't do the whole of it.
4 minutes. The first one was nice. Yeah.
Well, you just choose the ones
Yeah.
that would, because in the YrC, our tradition is mostly the kind of hymn sandwich, but sometimes saying, right, we'll do more of the what's known in contemporary circles as the praise and worship, that, you know, where you have songs interspersed with prayer. There is a value to doing that sometimes, and showing people different ways in which to worship. So, and I think this is a Sunday, particularly because there's quite a lot of songs that you can use in that way, that might work. So maybe I wouldn't even do a sermon at all. Maybe I just do like praise and worship stuff for part of it, and then prayer for the reflecting on prayer and prayer stations for the rest of it.
Amen, sister.
Absolutely stuffed if no one came out to your prayer stations again. What joy did your songs.
They wouldn't dare not now.
Thank you, Lithan. Yeah, prayer stations are. I have a kind of on-off relationship with prayer stations, and I wonder whether can you help me put my finger on it a bit, because I wonder whether prayer stations are sometimes just all a bit too nice. And if we're talking about prayer here with the guy who's utterly desperate and says, "Save me, sinner that I am," sort of thing. Prayer stations rarely do that. They're all kind of like nice, gently things. And I wonder whether we should have prayer stations, which one's like outside or something, where you go outside and you scream against a brick wall or something, and just that there are prayer stations like that just deal with some of the things that you're just feeling so desperate and whatever. So I don't know how people would design such a thing, but I'd quite like to see prayer stations that did that. That weren't quite so, pour some water in here, add some salt, or smell a nice perfume. And I'm probably upsetting everybody in the entire land now who love prayer stations. But,
No, you're just doing it wrong, Phil.
Yeah, you haven't actually got enough experience to do it properly.
I'll try and do it right next time so that no one comes out. Yeah. I was going to play that song, "How Lovely Is Your Dwelling Place," the first one you sang, and again the versions I've seen are always much slower. But then listening to the Fisher Folky people singing it, actually, the psalm here is a lot about praise, as you said. This is a praisey psalm. It's a journey psalm, isn't it? It's not a wistful. If they're singing this psalm on the way to pilgrimage to the temple, it's one man went to mow. They're songs to pass the time, aren't they? That's what these songs are, as they're heading towards Jerusalem and worshipping and praising at the same time, and anticipating the moment when they get over the brow of that hill and they can see the temple in the city beyond them. So yeah, I think it's appropriate to have a sort of faster, praisier version. I did come up with an idea, but I'm struggling to remember what it was now. Part of it was an unformed arty idea, which I still have to give some more thought to, that would help people with Psalm 84 and the idea of thinking through what their journey to God's dwelling place looks like. What would be the stopping points? And I'd quite like to do a big table with some stuff on and a yellow windy road or something, and invite people to come and place post-its probably is the easiest way, isn't it? Or draw on it or something, something that is on their journey towards finding God's presence. It might be their favorite armchair, or you're going to get mountains there. Someone's going to say mountain top, aren't they? But there you go. A range of experiences along there. Some people might say music. Some people, there might be all sorts of things in there that people, I think, are crucial stopping points through their valley of Bakar. I might even call it the Valley of Bakar, and pique people's interest. The other thing I toyed with, and decided that it's actually always a thing to avoid, and it used to be the thing that we used to do, and thankfully people have stopped doing it now, is trying to get over this thing about the Pharisee and the tax collector, and trying to say, well, this would have been really shocking to them, but it's not to us, as Lithan said quite eloquently, because we're expecting it to be the tax collector. In fact, I did a story last night with the brigades, the story of the two sons. And I got two of them to come out and act. The two sons, the dad wants them to go and help on the vineyard, and one says, yeah, of course I will, Dad, I'm with you in a sec, and the other one says, no chance, this is not my job, leave it there, I'm going back to bed, or something like that. And I paused the parable there, and I said, which one's the best of the sons? And quite a number of them had twigged how Jesus works. And they thought, hang on, it's not going to be the obvious one, is it? It's going to be the other one. So they twigged it before we'd even started. But the way we used to get around it is substituting modern day people or roles or types for the Pharisee and the tax collector. And I think that's just a road paved with disaster and prejudice. There used to be like the parable of the good punk rocker. Do you remember in the 70s? They were so hip and trendy. Let's just change Samaritan to punk rocker, because punk rockers are enemies of society and we all hate them. And you think, oh no, it's just betraying something about you, isn't it? So I would like to do something that rehabilitates the Pharisee, as you both said, rehabilitating the Pharisee, and do some kind of activity that actually stops for a moment and say, look, here's a Pharisee. This is what Pharisees are about. Pharisees, you may or may not agree with the way they tried this, but Pharisees were kind of trying to make obedience to God available to everyone, not just for the elite few priests who could do it. They were trying to make it accessible for everyone, by making it clear. Whether it worked out or not is another question, but their heart, they were respecting good folk. They weren't evil baddies. But you both said that, and I haven't got a specific idea about how to do that. But yeah, I think the arty installation of pathways to finding God's presence, or where is God's dwelling place, and what does it look like to you, and what are the milestones on that journey, all the traditional journey imagery that you can think of. I would try and incorporate into a 3D thing about prayer, and one giant prayer station, if you like, and the screaming wall outside in the car park, where they go one by one. Okay, any other thoughts before we pull down the curtain on Proper 25? No?
Just imagining Sawston's Wailing Wall.
I think it might have to be the big conker tree. The neighbours would never know. What's that noise moved from down the cut? The neighbours of Sawston Free Church got this weird thing about frogs, and it's really slightly creepy. I'm fairly sure they're not listening in, but the garden's full of frogs, and my children noticed it when they came up to my induction, because they went out to escape the church for a bit, and they noticed that the neighbours had opened the garage, and there are Kermit the Frogs hanging off the garage door, upside down. They said, Dad, it's worse. They're all hanging off the garage when they open the garage door. The frogs are hanging. So yeah, so I don't think they'd bat an eyelid at screaming as much as they can't. Anyway, that's a distraction. Lithan is going to lead us in prayer as we take on this task of preparing worship for our congregations.
Loving God be with us as we wrestle with the scriptures. Help us to fight the good fight. Help us as we delve into your word to discern what we and our congregations need to hear this morning, this Sunday, and help us to find the right ways through words, through song, through activity, to help people know how much they are loved and how much there's a crown that you've put on each of their heads, and help them to walk in your way. Amen.
Amen. We've been talking absolute worship. I am going onto eBay to order a portable soundproof chamber, which will be a prayer station for next week. We want to bless you as you go and prepare your worship for this coming week. Thank you.